Hello and welcome to this episode of How to Start, Grow and Monetize Your Podcast with me, James Burt, and the Podpreneur, Alex Chesnell. They can't believe it. The crowd goes wild. Chesnell. I flipping love Alex Chesnell. I just think he's a lovely fella. Today on the podcast, we are going to talk about how to turn your podcast into a content machine. That's right, I had to take one simple video, one simple piece of audio and turn it into blogs, clips, transcripts and much, much more to fuel your marketing machine, you beautiful bunch of coconuts. Now, this podcast is all about how much you can squeeze out of the lemon. How much juice can you get from your podcast lemon? Lemon, is that a good analogy? Lemon is generally a bad thing. Grapefruit. How much can you get from the podcast grapefruit? Now, you might be thinking, well,
that's my favourite fruit.
Is it really? Well, I'm really learning a lot about you. Is it really?
Yeah.
I've never met anyone who even likes grapefruit.
I love a grapefruit.
Oh, I don't feel I can be
Pink
friends
ones
with you.
especially.
Oh, I'm leaving. But today on the podcast, talk about how you can squeeze the most juice out of your podcast grapefruit, the pink ones. And because what a lot of people think is that, it's a piece of audio, or maybe it's a piece of video at most. But if you get this right, it can really be the fuel between your content machine. And in a world where everything is moving as fast as it is, if you're watching this, you're probably a coach, mentor, consultant, expert. You're probably having to do the thing that you do fundamentally for, your job or for the consultancy that you offer. And then you kind of got this secondary thing, whether you like it or not, which is you are your own full-time PR agent, full-time as well. And if you're trying to build a brand, especially a personal brand, then you kind of just got to swallow the pill and do both things at the same time, unfortunately. So if you can have one form of content like a podcast that can fuel everything else for you, it makes the job that much easier. What kind of content are you making from podcasts when you're creating episodes, my man?
And I will signpost people as well. There's a really good deck out there by Gary Vaynerchuk, and it's how to turn one piece of content into something like, I'm paraphrasing, 67 pieces of content or something like that. I've got the deck. Yeah. It's free. It's out there on the internet to download. And we're talking macro content and micro content. Okay, so macro content is your podcast, is your keynote speech, is your vlog, is your whatever that main thing is. Okay, and you turn that piece of macro content into lots of other pieces of micro content, i.e. video clips, carousels, audiograms back in the day, static artwork, blog, LinkedIn articles, etc., okay? Have you had this happen to you? So that's what I'm saying is the holy grail, that you turn this one thing into however many other pieces. And it doesn't need to be 67 pieces of content, okay? What would be nice if you have a weekly podcast is you turn that into 7 pieces of content. So every day you've got something that signposts people via short form content to the long form content where you want them to listen or watch it, okay? As an aside, has this happened to you? You get invited to go onto a podcast as a guest. You go on the podcast as a guest. Episode gets released by that podcast. They don't give you anything to promote it whatsoever.
I've had that. I found out I was on a podcast via a tweet.
Exactly that.
And it wasn't even them tweeting me. It was someone else going, I love this episode, at James Burt. And I was like,
didn't even know it was out.
Didn't even know.
Same.
And that's a great example. If you're going to the time, effort, energy, and frankly budget of making a long form piece of content, if you're not there for chopping it into shorter form pieces of content, you are absolutely categorically missing a massive trick. And the battle for long form attention is now being fought on short form platforms. So the likes of Reels, YouTube Shorts, TikTok. I mean, at the time of recording this, I think 3/4 of our views on YouTube are coming via the short form. Now, you might look at that and go, well, short form, my mate Jimbo always says this, long form funds your bank account and short form funds your ego, which I believe to a certain extent. But it also can be a catalyst to people finding out about your
discoverability.
Discoverability, which is a massive thing, but also just to sort of you're not just making short form for the fact of hopefully getting found. It's actually to build that expert authority on different platforms. So I'll give you an example. This podcast episode here, we could turn this into a podcast, which is what we're doing. It's going to be the audio version of it. Great. We could also turn it into a YouTube video, which you're also, if you watch on YouTube, we have done that. As well as this sort of like 15, 20-ish minute, whatever it's going to end up being, main pieces of content, you could chop that down. So for example, we can make a trailer. So we could take some of the amazing stuff that I say, like you could massively grow your audience when you do this. And maybe the editor can do one of them like...
Mate, they can't
well, they can bloody well cover it in glitter, can't they, and give it a go. But you could turn it into a trailer, so like sort of little sound bites cut together. You've probably seen the thing if you're in the podcasting space, the likes of Lewis Howes, Diver CEO, Ant's a good mate of ours. He's a master, the guy who's head of trailers at Diver CEO. They have turned that into an art form, but there's also just individual pieces of short form content as well, which you could just take sound bites and clips, which work as standalone videos. So now you've got trailers and you've also got short form clips. You could then take an extended clip from this podcast episode. We know, for example, that the algorithm on YouTube tends to rate videos that are over 8 minutes more highly than stuff that's shorter. But LinkedIn doesn't have that same algorithmic a sort of niche to it or variant to it. And again, you're using different platforms for different things. Expert authority is easier to build on LinkedIn, I personally believe, via your personal brand. So whilst you might not put the entire video onto LinkedIn because they will not watch 20 minutes necessarily, they might watch 4, 5, 6 minutes, which YouTube viewers generally wouldn't watch. So again, you could cut a more extended clip. So it's not the long form, it's not the macro or the micro short form, it's sort of in between a form. Say between 3 and 8 minutes in length, which can go as a secondary clip. You could also put that out as a second video if you wanted to on your YouTube channel. Yeah, so that's kind of like video and audio content covered off. Then from this episode, we could also take a transcript. So we could, back in the day when me and you started podcasting, I don't think there was even a service out there. You'd have to listen to it and write it down.
You'd have to do it manually.
Which would have been hardcore. Then after, there was rev.com. Do you remember rev.com? It was $1 per minute. So if you'd done a 60-minute episode... It's going to cost you $60. If you're doing that 4 times a month, it's going to cost you $240. All of a sudden, the cost of it start to ramp up. These days, you can literally take the MP3, which is the audio version of your podcast, stick it into Otter.ai, which we haven't actually got a affiliate for, but we definitely should. No, we haven't done that. We should definitely do that. Click the link. We'll put a link in the show notes to Otter because it's a very, very good service. But you can upload the MP3 to Otter, and that will give you a transcript. Now, from that transcript, I'm not a big fan of AI completely writing your content, but I'm a massive fan of AI doing 80% of the legwork for you. So what I'd personally be doing is I would put into ChatGPT, this is the target market, and have real clarity on like who I'm trying to speak to. Here's a transcript. Can you pull some of the best, what are the 5 biggest takeaways from this? Yeah. Great. From those 5 biggest takeaways, can you now write me a 500-word blog that resonates with this target market on this subject from this transcript? Brilliant. It will go and do it. And then I will refine that and I will make that better. I then might as well, so that's the blog itself. The blog, by the way, can be a Medium article. It could also be a LinkedIn article. It could be a LinkedIn post if it's under a certain size. It could be a post that you put onto other people's platforms. So there might be community groups in LinkedIn, for example. It could go out as a newsletter. It could then also go out as somebody else's newsletter. You could put it into community groups and all that kind of good stuff. I could then also, from that blog, I could then go, right, okay, ChatGPT. I could do it manually if I wanted to, but for the sake of speed, I go, right, ChatGPT, here's the blog. Now take the 5 biggest takeaways from this blog that I've written. Bear in mind, it's taken the 5 biggest takeaways out of the podcast episode, and it will give me a list. Brilliant. Now write me the text version of a LinkedIn carousel, which could also work, or LinkedIn SlideShare, which also would work as a carousel on social media. Make me that piece of content, and then I can have that designed. So now all of a sudden, I've got graphics, I've got videos, I've got blogs, I've got video, and that content engine, as you mentioned before, could be pumped out every single day. Now, what people might have heard when you said, get 7 bits of content, well, isn't that going to be a bit samey and a bit boring? No, because ultimately you talk about different formats. You could have, like you said, there could be a graphic. There could be like a quote graphic of like a killer point.
It's the same call to action. Go and watch the long form version 100%. Or listen to the long form. But it's being framed in different ways because each post that you're putting out on social media or your newsletter or your blog, show notes, and another one that can be used for, completely different.
Yes. And it's also not just necessarily about then driving, not just about, you definitely should have a call to action, a strong call to action in those posts, but it's not necessarily about solely driving the traffic back to that main podcast episode.
No.
Yes, if you're using YouTube Shorts, you can link through now a full-length episode, and they've only been able to do that in the last sort of 6-8 weeks, something like that at the time of recording. But you can now go, this is the video that's related to that shorter form content, which makes complete sense. Same with TikTok. Really, on a video platform, you're trying to get them to go like for like. Do you like this video? You might like this bigger video. But in terms of the other written content, in my opinion, it's not just great for driving, a LinkedIn article isn't just great for driving back to the podcast, which it might
Great
be.
for thought leadership, personal branding,
expert
all
authority.
of that. Yeah.
It also could go on your website. I hear this all the time, people who are spending thousands and thousands of pounds.
Thousands
on SEO. Oh my God. The amount of clients that I talk to are like, I'm going to spend £1,500 a month on SEO. Like, what are they actually doing for that money?
I know someone who's just spent 75,000 on SEO on their website.
75?
75. Names will be kept secret.
75,000 on SEO?
Yeah.
Do they want to sponsor a podcast instead? It's a better use of your money. But SEO is really, really powerful for certain brands and businesses. And again, from a podcast perspective, every single week you are making fresh content, which you can transcribe, you can turn it into a blog, which obviously, like we say, it could go onto LinkedIn, it could go onto Medium, it could go out as your newsletter. It could also be a blog on your website. And that blog on your website could have backlinks. And you can move people around your content cycle. What is he called? Brendan Burchard, the guy who wrote High Performance Habits.
Yeah.
He calls it circular virality, which sounds like right marketing waffle, doesn't it? It's like you with forensic. But the circular virality is essentially
we got it in the episode.
Move people in and around your own content cycle. So from TikTok, push them to YouTube. From YouTube, push them to Twitter. From Twitter, push them to LinkedIn. From LinkedIn, push them to Facebook or wherever it may be. Always be moving people around your content cycle. But again, it's fueled by this longer form piece of content. Now you might go, well, surely I could just do that with anything, couldn't I? Yes, any form of long form content, you can repurpose and make micro content from that, but it needs to be, in my opinion, it needs to be a longer form piece of content for you to be able to repurpose it well. So it needs to be either a podcast or a video or a long form blog. Maybe you're an amazing writer. Brilliant. Okay, absolutely fine. The other thing you could do, this would be quite clever, on Medium, because of accessibility, it actually has an AI voice that will read your article. So even if you're not doing a podcast yourself, or you don't want to do a podcast yourself, you could write the article, put it onto Medium. Medium could then play the audio for you, and you could turn that into a podcast. I just thought of it off the cuff, Chisnell.
And can I caveat this entire...
No, you cannot. You could just bask in my content glory.
So if you are, bringing it back to the beginning of this episode, if you are that person who records their podcast every week, puts it out, and you do not have any promotional assets, don't stop doing that, and don't necessarily strive to create 67 pieces of content to put out that week. Even if you pulled out one video clip from that podcast and gave it to your guest, guess what you're going to do? Yes. You've got the potential to not just double your reach, but your guest has probably got, I don't know, if you're like the average person, at least 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever social media platforms where they have different communities living, where they can share that content and therefore increase the reach of your podcast, therefore reach more people, therefore potentially leading you to monetize your podcast, employ that first person who can do the jobs on your podcast that you don't enjoy, whatever they might be, let you focus on the thing that you're doing by just trying to create an extra thing. Okay, yes, we would love for you to be able to create it so that you've got something to go out every day, but start with the next thing. If you're not doing anything, just try and glean one clip from there, or one carousel, or one static artwork with a quote on it, a quote graphic, whatever that might be. That's moved you further towards that goal of growing your podcast audience.
And if you can only do the one thing, if you can only commit to it, if you've only got the time or only got the resource, just bear in mind that 80% of online traffic is now video. Video is such a kingpin in terms of gaining that audience. So if you can, and we've got clients and they don't want to because they talk about the pharmaceutical industry and they talk about AI in the pharmaceutical industry, so it's a niche of a niche, and it's a bit it's a bit like the Wild West out there. They don't want to be on video, which is fine, but I personally would still record the conversation for video.
Correct.
Because then even if you're going to use a guest clip, you can capture that from that video. And to your point, you know, a lot of people who listen to this podcast are in the B2B space. They're consultants, experts, mentors, coaches, whatever it may be. Even if you get a clip of your guest, which makes them look and feel like a rock star, you create that for them, they share that out. Exactly to your point, that network effect of that audience that they've already got comes to your podcast. You start to influentially build your audience. Sorry, exponentially was the word I was looking for, but I tried to start out. You influentially and exponentially grow your audience. So and I think it's a great point. You know, if you're doing nothing, do the one next thing. If you're doing two things, do the one next thing and step it up.
As well as the coaches, consultants, B2B businesses that listen to this podcast, we've also got the prime ministers, the presidents, the celebrities. Sure. What advice would you have for them?
Just do the same.
Okay. Thank you.
I've got loads of great advice I'd love to give to the government, but no one wants to hear it, frankly.
Thank you for listening or watching another episode of Pod School. Start, grow, and monetize your podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, we have many more episodes just like this.
We do.
But very different. If you would like to join our community where you can learn to grow your podcast, learn to monetize your podcast, learn to just get started if you haven't done that thing yet, then come and join us over at Pod School. Link in the episode. Come and join us over there and you will be forever happy.
You will indeed. It's completely free to join, by the way. And there's a 3 weeks worth of training on how to get clarity on your podcast, know who to go after. There's an ideal dream listener exercise and all that kind of good stuff over there on Pod School. Really nice bunch of people over there who are proactively trying to build their podcast to the next level. And we will see you on the next episode. Ta-da.